Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday, the 31st of July. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 523 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. At least 5 people, including a 10-year-old child, have been killed and more than 60 injured after Russia struck a high-rise apartment in Kryvyi. Authorities said people were also trapped under rubble by the attack. The regional governor, Sergei Lysak, stated that the injured included 2 boys and 3 girls aged from 4 to 17 years old, and that 20 people were hospitalized. President Zelensky said more than 350 people were involved in the rescue operation, adding that floors 4 through 9 of the residential building have been completely destroyed. The Ukrainian First Lady, Olena Zelenska, said, "This is how the week begins in a Ukrainian city that just wants a quiet, normal life. Russia wants to take peace and life away," and she offered condolences to the victims and their families. The city is the hometown of Zelenska and her husband. Alexei Kuleba, the deputy head of Zelensky's office, said, "Every day Ukrainian cities are under fire from Russian terrorists. Sumy, Zaporizhia, Dnipro and Kharkiv, and they are only the last few days." He said targeting civilians was a sign of the despair and defeat of the Russian Federation at the front. 3 Ukrainian drones were shot down over Moscow as they damaged a high-rise building containing government offices and briefly shut down an international airport, according to reports. The Moscow mayor, Sergei Sobyanin, said nobody was hurt and there was only minor damage to the facade of 2 office buildings in the Moscow city business district early yesterday. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky warned, "War is returning to the territory of Russia," after the drones were downed over Moscow. The president said that it was an inevitable, natural and absolutely fair process that Russia's symbolic centres and military bases would be targeted. The Kremlin today described the drone attack on Moscow as an act of desperation by Ukraine after setbacks on the battlefield. Dmitry Peskov said it has been very difficult for Ukrainian forces on the front line since it launched its counter-offensive in June, adding it is obvious that the counter-offensive is not a success. Ukrainian forces have recaptured nearly 15 square kilometres of land from Russian troops in the east and south over the past week during the counter-offensive, the Deputy Defence Minister Hanna Maliar said earlier today. Suspilny reports that as a result of morning shelling in Kherson, a 60-year-old employee of a utility company was killed and 4 more people were injured. Russian airstrikes destroyed an estimated 180,000 metric tons of grain in the space of 9 days this month, the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry said. The Russian mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin appears to have said in a voice message published today that his Wagner group was not currently recruiting fighters, but would likely do so in future. The former Russian president, Dmitry Medvedev, said Moscow would be forced to use a nuclear weapon if Kyiv's counter-offensive was a success. And Moldova has extended the national state of emergency for a further 60 days. The country, which borders Ukraine, first declared the state of emergency on the 24th of February 2022 in response to the full-scale Russian invasion of its neighbour. Now, we're lucky enough to be joined this evening by a regular friend and contributor to the programme, John Robertson. John was a lecturer in teacher education for more than 20 years with a particular interest in ICT and primary education, but he is now a retired professor from the University of the West of Scotland. John blogs at Talking Up Scotland 2 on politics and the media and many other things. John, good evening. It's 2 old beardies this evening. How are you keeping?
I'm good. I hope you are too.
Certainly, John. It's a pleasure to see you on Broadcasting Scotland this evening. Thank you for joining us. Our first item this evening is that Rishi Sunak is hoping to extract as much oil and gas from the North Sea as possible, according to Number 10, as the UK government has announced over 100 new drilling licences in a maxing out policy that environmental groups say will obliterate the UK's climate commitments. The news has bemused independent supporters in Scotland, who were told that there was very little oil and gas left in the North Sea during the 2014 referendum. In a flying visit to Aberdeenshire today, the Prime Minister claimed the move was entirely consistent with our plan to get to net zero, telling broadcasters that domestic supplies were significantly more efficient than shipping gas and oil from other countries, despite the fact that North Sea oil and gas is traded on the open international market. Sunak's junior energy minister, Andrew Bowie, who's the MP for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, described the proposals for the new North Sea licensing round as maxing out our oil and gas reserves, a notion that was backed by Downing Street. The decision to issue the new licences has been heavily criticised by the environmental groups and the Scottish Greens, who said that the new oil and gas exploration licences will be catastrophic for the climate and will do nothing for national security. So, John, firstly, it's not just the Greens and environmental groups who have criticised this move. Chris Skidmore, who's a former net zero SAR for the Tory government, tweeted this morning that Sunak's push marked, quote, the wrong decision at precisely the wrong time when the rest of the world is experiencing heat waves. He warned Sunak that he was on the wrong side of modern voters and on the wrong side of history too. So, John, do you think, is Chris Skidmore right?
He certainly is, and I mean, the whole thing is just astonishing. The Conservatives, in desperation, have decided that the only way they're going to survive here is to appeal to the UK's many motorists, as he indicates that he's on the side of people driving around housing estates fast, and regardless of the effect on the accident rate in these areas, and now he's for full ahead on exploiting Scotland's oil resources and gas resources. I take it he didn't visit Professor Roy Thompson at Edinburgh University on the way up, who told us in 2017 only 10% of that was left, the oil and gas. So it's an astonishing thing. I feel that, I don't know if many will remember, there's a great photograph of Tony Blair in 2003 taking a selfie of himself, and behind are the flames of Iraq, of Baghdad, the whole of Iraq going up in flames. I can see Rishi Sunak again with his mobile phone taking a selfie as southern Europe burns behind him. You couldn't make it up. It's like reality has to be whatever will help the Tories survive. Doesn't matter what other realities are available, what reality might help us survive. And so they're prepared, with absolutely no care for anyone else, they're prepared to push on that.
That's a very good point, John. And we'll be looking out for Rishi Sunak's selfies because I think he's going away on holiday in the morning. So we don't know if he's going to the Mediterranean. It seems unlikely.
Roads.
But you mentioned, but you mentioned car ownership there, and I thought it's worth pointing out that in the last hour or so, polling from Redfield and Wilton has appeared, which points out that Labour currently has a 9-point lead over the Conservatives amongst car owners, and a 38-point lead amongst non-car owners. And of course, in the midst
Okay.
of all of this, I think it's fair to say that Conservative car owners are much more likely to own hybrid or electric cars than Labour car owners. So, and the other thing from Redfield and Wilton is that overall the government's net approval rating on the environment is minus 18%. So does that polling data that's just appeared this afternoon, does that feel about right to you?
It does, and clearly Conservative support is more middle class, and to afford a hybrid and all electric, you really pretty much have to be. I mean, they're just ridiculously expensive. Yeah, I don't suppose it's well thought out. I mean, it's desperate. I mean, they know they're in deep trouble here, and so they're just bashing around not just, I keep saying desperate, but that's what it is. Attempt to survive in less than a year's time, when we come up for election again. It's hard to believe, but it's real.
Thanks, John. And just maybe to finish the point about thrashing around, I noticed this afternoon that on the 3rd of February 2022, The current Tory chairman, Greg Hands, tweeted, and I quote, UK production of gas is not large enough to materially impact the global price of gas. So, who do you think is right, the Prime Minister or his party chairman? Because they both can't be right.
It looks as if anybody can be right, really. It doesn't. There doesn't seem any limit on who can be right these days. I mean, Professor Thompson is who said the oil was down to 10% and the gas and it's going to run out. He is Professor Emeritus still at Edinburgh University. I should say I retired Professor Emeritus, despite being correct and everything. So,
The only
we know
professor.
it's which reality.
Well, that's a good point, John. The only Professor Emeritus I ever knew was known as Lord Glenfiddich, and we'll see no more than that. But we'll move on to
Well, you've
another
just,
story.
yeah, careful not to insult my favourite whiskey.
Thanks, John. We'll also look at another aspect of news from the Northeast today, because during his visit to Aberdeenshire, Rishi Sunak also announced that the UK government had finally agreed to fund the Acorn carbon capture and storage project. In 2014, the then UK Energy Secretary, Ed Davey, indicated that the UK government intended to make Peterhead Power Station the location for the pioneering carbon capture and storage technology. But funding for the project was withdrawn at the 11th hour, in a move that was described at the time as devastating for the region. A political outcry followed in Scotland, but in the aftermath of the independence referendum, Westminster clearly felt confident in ignoring us, and 7 years later the North East was sidelined again, this time losing out to projects in the north of England and the Red Wall seats. The Acorn project at the St Fergus gas terminal in Peterhead, if it had received funding in the first round, would have been ready by the middle of the decade. The facility was instead designated as a reserve cluster. The Acorn carbon capture and storage project will divert industrial emissions and store them in depleted gas reservoirs in the North Sea. The SNP's Westminster leader and MP for Aberdeen South, Stephen Flynn, said, "The SNP has for decades now led the charge on demanding investment for carbon capture and storage in the North East. Any investment is, of course, welcome. However, the UK government has taken Scotland down this path before and failed to deliver every single time, leaving Scotland's green energy future in jeopardy. This cannot happen again." He went on, "There can be no more broken promises or delays. Now is the time to strike on Scotland's green energy potential." So, John, as I was saying, for the area around Peterhead, this follows a decades-long wait to get CCS projects running, following the cancelled projects in 2007, 2015, and 2021. Now, we all know how well this current Westminster government delivers infrastructure. We can look to the Queen Elizabeth line or HS2 if anyone's in any doubt. So, in light of the repeated political cancellations and Westminster's inability to deliver infrastructure, do you think is the Acorn project ever going to pump any CO2 into the ground?
Well, again, a lot to say about this. It does seem like that Rishi Sunak is now trying to catch up on Sir Keir Starmer with regard to U-turns. As you know, at one point in the past, as you pointed out, clearly the Scottish government was to be punished by having the carbon capture withdrawn from the northeast and, as you say, put somewhere else. Now suddenly, out of the blue, we're getting the carbon capture back again as some attempt to seduce the Scottish electorate into supporting. So, but that again, that's the business of the lack of reality in political actions. That the science is subservient to the politics. It doesn't really matter what the best solution is here. It depends which one will actually read well in the media, and this one seems to. I have reservations personally. I'm not a scientist, but I've spoken to many. I think carbon capture. I agree with the Greens here. I don't think carbon capture actually is much of a solution. There are serious doubts as to whether it cuts the carbon emissions at all. But I can understand why the people of the North East will be delighted to have it. Let's just hope they're not stupid enough to suddenly start voting for the Tories again in the North East.
Well, I was going to you anticipate the next question I was going to ask you, John, because Speaking to the BBC's woeful Good Morning Scotland programme this morning, Rishi Sunak said, "This is a good story for the UK overall. It's not about political seats, it's just about doing the right thing for the country." Now, if I read that correctly, that means it's all about political seats, then, doesn't it? We've heard recently from Sunak's own mouth how he, as Chancellor, diverted funding away from deserving constituencies in order to boost the chances of Tory MPs in the shires.
I was appalled by Sunak's rudeness to the good people at Good Morning Scotland. Doesn't he realise these people are his faithful servants, and they spend much of their lives interrupting SNP politicians, and yet he got grumpy with them. I think he completely misunderstood who they are.
Not a great surprise there at all, John. Not a surprise. But let's leave Aberdeenshire for the moment, because a new survey has revealed that over half, 58% of UK voters, have admitted that they are struggling or just about managing during the ongoing cost of living crisis. The survey by BMG Consulting found that 52% of those surveyed said they were worried about paying for everyday essentials such as food, petrol, and bills, while 80% said that the cost of living crisis was the biggest issue facing the UK at the moment. It comes ahead of an expected announcement from the Bank of England on whether to raise interest rates for the 14th consecutive time. Inflation has remained high throughout the first half of 2023, with the latest figures showing that prices rose by 7.9% last month, with food inflation remaining high at 17.4%. Stuart Hosey, the SNP's economy spokesperson, has said that the UK government should be doing more to support vulnerable people during the cost of living crisis to prevent rising poverty levels. Commenting, Stuart Hosey MP said the result of 13 years of Tory austerity and the calamitous impact of Brexit has exacerbated the ongoing cost of living crisis, which continues to hammer households across Scotland. The figures revealed in this recent survey, he continued, highlight the harsh impact of this Westminster-made crisis. The UK government should be taking note and offering further support to those financially suffering the most. So, John, do you think that the Bank of England will slow down its relentless rising of interest rates in view of this latest data, or instead will they plough on regardless because the only economic lever they have is interest rates, and the persistent Tory austerity dogma is that apparently you can starve people out of poverty and into a stronger economy?
I'm proud to say I'm not an economist, so I guess you're right about that is the only tool they have. Um, I think this current cost of living crisis is much wider than people's abilities to pay their mortgages. I mean, clearly the providers of mortgages could do something about that. Extending to 35-year mortgages or whatever. I think that's happening in Japan, where mortgages are now extended much longer, and that would be one solution to that. But the real problem, I think, is not so much with those who are struggling with a mortgage, but those who are struggling at a rather more basic level with, with just feeding their families and paying for heating bills. I mean, these are the food and energy, in particular for house heating. These are the areas of real pressure, and the situation is dire for many families at that end of the continuum. Um, it's not enough, I know, but what the Scottish Government has done with the child payment is clearly taking the edge off that, and child poverty continues to be significantly lower in Scotland. I think once the child payment um, effect is properly counted, and we see the statistics, I think we might discover that that's one of the most effective pieces of, uh, of progressive policy development that any country in Europe has seen. I'm very confident that will turn out very well. But overall, the situation is dire. And I think it must be really difficult. Young adults looking after children and trying to survive, never mind pay for a mortgage.
Well, that's a very good point, John. I was going to talk to you for a moment about a particular segment in that demographic of families, because some 59% of parents who were polled by BMG said that they had already planned or would consider taking their children out of school early next year in an attempt to get less expensive holidays. As an educationalist, I was wondering what's your take on that polling data, and what might it mean in longer term for the education of the young people affected and taken out of school like this?
It depends how early they mean, I suppose. I mean, I won't try and suggest that in the last few days before the summer holidays or before the Christmas holidays, I won't pretend that huge amount is happening. I mean, most schools are winding down in those few days. I mean, if we're talking about people going a week early, as they often did in the past, I don't think the effects are disastrous. I mean, children can easily recover from that kind of thing. But if they're talking about holidays, more in the middle of terms or close to the middle of terms, then damage will be considerable in terms of those children's progression.
Thanks, John. I knew you'd have an informed and helpful perspective on that. And I'm sure that you and I will be discussing the impact of the cost of living crisis on families and others again this year. But we'll move on now because the Eurozone's economy has returned to growth after a long period of stagnation as inflation in the 20 member currency area continues to fall from last year's peak. Activity expanded by 0.3% in the second quarter, while the inflation rate declined from 5.5 to 5.3% in July, according to the EU statistics agency Eurostat. There was also an improvement to previous gross domestic product data, revealing that a recession announced in June based on previous estimates had in fact been narrowly avoided. The earlier release had said the economy shrank in the last quarter of 2022 and in the first quarter of this year, but the revised figures show 0% growth in January to March instead of a contraction. Financial markets rose on the back of the positive figures, which showed the Eurozone's consumers and firms had been more resilient in dealing with rising interest rates than many policymakers had forecast. The German stock market continued a streak of gains that pushed values to an all-time high, while Italy's FTSE MIB added 0.5% to touch fresh 15-year highs, lifted by the state-controlled defence and aerospace group, who are also operating in Scotland, Leonardo. So, John, Bert Colleen, who's a senior economist at ING, said the differences between countries were large in terms of performance. He said the German and Italian economies continue to suffer, in part because their manufacturing sectors are larger and demand for goods is still contracting. He said that Germany saw flat GDP growth quarter on quarter, while Italy dipped back. And on the other hand, France and Spain continued to perform better. French GDP growth accelerated to 0.5%, and Spain saw growth decelerate from 0.5% to 0.4%. So I was wondering, thinking not as an economist, but in terms of analysing data, with such variation between member states, within the EU, does EU-wide data actually tell us very much at all?
Well, I think in some ways it doesn't matter. I think that's the great thing about the EU is that maybe doesn't matter too much. If the EU didn't exist and we were to imagine, a merger of that kind, an economic merger of 20 or so countries, the most in the most peaceful, the most affluent, the most technologically advanced uh, part of the world, getting together and trading with each other and sharing and allowing their people to travel freely and allowing students to travel freely across universities, we would probably guess that's going to work quite well. And if we had any sense, we want to be part of it. So I think the variation within Europe, because of Europe's strength, because of Europe's great strength, 400 million people, um, with some parts of that, doing certain things well and other parts doing other things well, it just it's not gonna struggle compared to other parts of the world. And we're incredibly stupid not to be part of it.
That's a fair point, John. In terms of resilience across different sectors and strength in numbers, it's a very fair point that you make. And I was just wondering, thinking perhaps from a Scottish perspective a little bit, if this analysis from ING is correct, and on that hypothesis, if countries which have larger manufacturing sectors are being hit harder, why then does the UK still have such poor performance when, as we know, anyone who's lived in Scotland since the 1980s knows there's almost no manufacturing left in our economy?
Yeah. Well, it's clearly it's very complex now. I wouldn't feel in a position to judge that. But one of the things the point you made there about Scotland, the highlights what we could contribute. Because the one thing Central Europe is a bit weak on is energy production. And for our size, we punch way above our weight on that. And I think our energy production would be of huge value to the economies like that of Germany. So, I just can't see it going badly.
Thanks, John. That's again some great analysis and great input. I'm grateful to you. We'll move on now and look at the cost of living crisis from a different perspective, because new independent research has found that the UK's rate of inflation on car insurance has skyrocketed in comparison to neighbouring European countries. Analysis for the SNP by the House of Commons Library has found that since January 2022, UK car insurance inflation has grown exponentially, rising to a massive 43.1% in May 2023. In contrast, the inflation rate for car insurance in May 2023 in neighbouring EU countries like Denmark, 6.2%, Germany, 2.6%, the Netherlands, 2.4%, and Spain, 0%, have all fared better, while both Belgium and Ireland's car insurance inflation has actually reduced. The analysis, which provides a comparison over a full 2-year period, also revealed that since May 2021, only the UK's car insurance inflation rate has risen above 5% annually. Commenting, the SNP's transport spokesman, Gavin Newlands MP, said, "This latest analysis demonstrates that independence is the only way Scotland can rid itself of broken Brexit Britain. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor keep telling the public that inflation is a global problem, but this independent analysis shows that Brexit Britain is being hit far harder than our European neighbours." While independent nations within the EU have kept car insurance inflation relatively low, the UK's has spiralled out of control, skyrocketing to a staggering 43.1%. So, John, to look at this from the Brexit perspective rather than an economic perspective, because we're not going to do too much any more economics tonight if we can help it, what do you think is driving this particular inflation? Is it the cost of repairs here going up due to a lack of mechanics and a shortage of spare parts being imported from the EU into Brexit Island, or is it simply price gouging by insurers?
Well, I mean, I don't feel expert enough to deny the first part may have some element of truth in it, but my gut feeling is this is profiteering by the insurance companies because they know they can get away with it. Because after how many years are we now? 12, 13 years of conservative rule. The rules, all of the other rules, all of the other rules have fallen apart. You basically can do what you like if you can get away with it. And I had personal experience of this just a few months ago. My, 72, I drive about 5,000 miles a year, not very often out of the town actually, driving much. And they tried to push up my premium by about 40, 50%. In 1 year, 40, 50%. I phoned them up and they agreed to just cut it back down again. They had the scope to do that. They were clearly just taking advantage of loyal customers. And I've heard other people say the same. And I think that's because we have that culture. We have that rotten, exploitative, cynical culture, which, is supposed to be business, but it's a very smelly kind of business that the Conservatives have encouraged in this country. And that's my reading. May not be true.
Thanks, John. Well, your own data and your own experience is as valid as anything else. And yes, in the context of the behaviour of insurers over the years, and calls for the way in which they penalise existing customers and favour new customers to be stopped, I think you may well be onto something there. Thank you. We'll move on again, though, because the chief executive of the outsourcing firm Capita is to step down as the company reels from a cyber attack that could result in a hefty fine from the UK's Information and Privacy Regulator. Capita said that John Lewis would step down by the end of the year, making way for Adolfo Hernandez, currently the Vice President of Telecommunications at Amazon Web Services. The handover was announced with Capita still recovering from the impact of an attack by a ransomware group calling themselves Black Basta, which hacked the company's Office 365 software and accessed the personal data of staff working for the company and dozens of clients. The Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, has the power to levy penalties on companies that fail to keep people's private data safe, and they have issued significant fines in the past. In 2020, it fined British Airways £183 million before reducing the penalty to £20 million, citing mitigating factors such as the company's parlous financial position amid the COVID pandemic. About 90 organisations have said that their data was breached in the attack on Capita, which runs crucial services, including pension schemes for local councils, the military, and the NHS. Among the victims of the hack were the London boroughs of Barnet and Barking and Dagenham and South Oxfordshire Council. Capita, which also handles the licence fee for the BBC, has said it expected the incident to cost it between 15 and £20 million, covering specialist professional fees, recovery and remediation costs, as well as investment to reinforce its cybersecurity defences and strengthen its IT security. The estimated sum is not thought to take into account a potential fine from the ICO. Capita has also not disclosed whether it paid a ransom to the hackers, who typically seek to extort money from companies from which they have stolen customer data. So, John, Capita told investors that while it had been able to significantly restrict, in its words, the impact of the attack, it still expects to incur costs of 15 to £20 million. And as I was saying, as well as councils and the NHS, Capita provides services to the National Cyber Security Centre. It runs services on behalf of the Cabinet Office, HMRC, the Ministry of Justice, police forces, and its private sector customers include operating call centres for BMW, William Hill, Thames Water, O2, and the RSPCA. So, with a portfolio of customers like that, if those customers of Capita and those customers, you and me, have been affected, it's likely that this ransomware hack is going to cost a great deal more than 15 to £20 million, isn't it?
It is. This sounds like neglect at the top level, and there are some very, very well paid senior executives in corporations like this. And for some time now, for a very long time, we've known that this can happen, and they should be employing people and setting up systems to make sure it doesn't happen, because it can be done. I mean, there are institutions that have not been hacked, and I know from personal experience from a relative of mine went to Abertay University more than 10 years ago to do a course called ethical hacking. And that's where you would learn how to hack so that you could then stop hackers, a bit like a kind of digital gamekeeper. So this can be done. I think where institutions fail is because they're not prioritising. They're prioritising profits rather than security.
Well, that's a point I was going to ask you about, John. Do you think our governments and regulators, are they doing enough to make sure that the industry does more to protect itself and to protect you and me and their customers from just this sort of ransomware attack, which is becoming more common nowadays?
Well, again, it's this culture, isn't it? It's this business culture that's been promoted, this laissez-faire business culture, which is all about maximum salaries for chief executives and maximum dividends for shareholders, and a lack of willingness to pay for the staff that will actually keep the system going and keep it safe.
Thanks, John. We'll move on now because at least 44 people have been killed and almost 200 injured in a bomb blast in Pakistan's northwestern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province that targeted a political party gathering. Police said that the explosion at a rally yesterday afternoon for the conservative Jamiat ul Islam Party, a government coalition partner, was carried out by a suicide bomber who detonated his explosives vest close to the stage where several senior leaders of the party were sitting. It said initial investigations suggested that the Islamic State group IS, which operates in Afghanistan and is an enemy of the Afghan Taliban, could be behind the attack, and officers were still investigating. At the moment, no group has claimed responsibility. More than 500 supporters were gathered at a hall near a market for the rally, which was being held ahead of elections expected later this year when the blast took place. Footage showed ambulances arriving to transfer the injured to hospitals. Feroz Jamal, the provincial information minister, told reporters that at least 44 people had been, in his words, martyred and nearly 200 wounded in the bombing. A health emergency was declared at the Bajaur District Hospital and in adjoining areas, and some patients were moved by helicopter to Peshawar hospitals. Officials were announcing the arrival of Abdul Rashid, a regional party leader, when the bomb went off. Maulana Ziaullah Jan, a local leader, was killed in the blast. Rashid said the attack was an attempt to remove JUIF from the field before parliamentary elections in November, but he said that such tactics would not work. So, John, 44 people have been martyred and nearly 200 wounded in this bombing at a political rally. Does that make people less likely to participate in democratic politics? And is that maybe the point in this attack?
I guess so. I mean, that's what terrorism's about, isn't it? It's about destabilizing the population so that democratic processes become really not very effective. People are afraid. Um, I wouldn't feel at all able to say much about how Pakistan can resolve its problems. I mean, these are deep seated problems, and of course they do derive from imperial arrival and imperial departure creates that kind of instability, and obviously the partitioning of India into India and Pakistan was at the root of all of this. I think the key thing here is for the West to keep out, by all means, provide aid, by all means, provide support of various kinds, but do not get in there and try and police the situation, because we know from experience, bitter experience, that just makes things worse. We have to just be patient here, and if we treat them with kindness to the extent best we can, then maybe over quite a long period of time, things may become less troublesome than they are.
Thanks, John. Your point about imperial ambition is a good one, and also about the role of the East and the West. I was going to talk to you a little bit because yesterday's bombing came hours before the arrival of the Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng in Islamabad, where he was to participate in an event to mark a decade of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is a package under which Beijing has invested billions of dollars in Pakistan.
Mm.
In recent months, China has helped Pakistan avoid its default on sovereign payments. However, some Chinese nationals have also been targeted by militants in the northwest of Pakistan and elsewhere in the country. So I wondered, thinking from the perspective of the Chinese, is the security situation, or perhaps the relative lack of security, is that going to begin to inhibit Chinese investment activities in Pakistan? Or, to the point you were making about the West, might it stiffen the way in which China operates and protects what it regards as its investments in Pakistan?
I think it will take more than that to deter the Chinese in their ambitions. I think there are, for for all the faults we may find in their political system, they're not soft, they're not weak. So I think it takes far more than that to deter them. Um, this is obviously is for me a kind of an emerging thing. I mean, and for many of us, we've all known for some time now about the hostility towards the West amongst many Islamic groups in the Middle East and in the subcontinent. I don't think, well, I'm not as aware of what the tensions are between China and these Islamic groups. I think in the past, these Islamic groups were probably quite positive towards China because China would help them with supplies at times. But that may suddenly create a new kind of conflict, which I hope we won't watch with any kind of glee. Um, but clearly, we could see new problems there now. Um, again, I'd have to be much more clever than I am to know what we do about this.
No, that's a very good point that you make, John, particularly with regard to the reports of the treatment by the Chinese state of Muslims, the Uyghurs,
Mm.
in parts of China. And so the point that you're making in terms of conflict between Muslim fundamentalists and the Chinese state. I think in China, the Chinese state seems to have been able to manage that very effectively. But that's a very different proposition to Pakistan and other parts of the world, not under Chinese control. So yes, perhaps everybody should learn from past imperial experience and the West's adventures uh, during the Great Game and since in that part of the world. But we'll move on now because a Superior Court judge in Georgia, in the state of Georgia, has rejected an attempt by Donald Trump to derail District Attorney Fannie Willis's investigation into his campaign to overturn the 2020 election results in that state. The ruling by Judge Robert McBurney is in response to a motion Trump filed in March seeking to block a grand jury report ordered by Willis and to stop it from being used in any prosecutions. Willis has said that indictments in the case could come any time between now and the end of August. The movement's asserted injuries that would open the doors of the courthouse to their claims insufficient or else speculative and unrealized. They are insufficient because, while being the subject or even target of a highly publicized criminal investigation is likely an unwelcome and unpleasant experience, no court ever has held that that status alone provides a basis for the courts to interfere with or halt an investigation, the judge wrote. He added that the request to block the report's use is not what either statutory or case law generally allows, and also he rejected Trump's request that Willis be removed from the case. So, John, we'll look at Trump from a number of perspectives, if we may. Firstly, the Washington Post is reporting that at a campaign rally over the weekend, Trump said Congress should refuse to authorize a single additional shipment of our depleted weapons stockpiles to Ukraine until the FBI, the DOJ, and the IRS hands over every scrap of evidence they have on the Biden crime family's corrupt business dealings. So, firstly, do you think is Trump really going to signal that he's going to double down on his previous, how can I put it, bromance with Vladimir Putin, while Putin has since invaded a neighboring sovereign state? Or, as in so much else, is this positioning and posturing for Trump only all about Donald Trump?
Well, famous last words, but I think Trump is finished. So I don't think it matters much. I mean, he clearly is shameless and will do anything he can. Just as, I mean, it kind of puts the UK Conservatives into perspective a bit. They're not as bad as he is, dare I say. But I have a feeling he's shot his bolt, as they say, and I don't think he's coming back. Even if he becomes the Republican candidate, I think Biden will win by a greater margin this time now. I think the Republicans are deeply wounded, hold below the waterline, as they say, and I see also dying faster than the rest of the population. I don't know if you saw the NBC had a report on the COVID death rate amongst Republicans and Democrats post vaccine, and Republicans have been dying about twice the numbers of Democrats post vaccine. So it doesn't look good for them.
That's a very good point that you make, John. I was going to ask you about this morning. The New York Times and Siena College released a poll which they say confirms Trump's popularity amongst Republicans, despite the legal troubles and everything else.
Yep.
They conclude that the president is far and away the front runner for the Republican nomination, with 54% support, according to the survey.
Yeah.
Its closest competitor is Ron DeSantis, but even that's a generous description because the poll has him at 17%, and no other candidate even gets into double-digit support. Mike Pence, Tim Scott, and Nikki Haley are all at about 3%. So, in light of what you were saying, how is Trump going to be able to maintain what appears to be his current grip on the Republican Party, come what may, be it legal problems or his voters dying post-COVID?
Well, I mean, it does look as if his legal problems should stop him in his tracks. But as you pointed out, he remains the most popular candidate amongst Republican supporters, despite it all. Doesn't seem to matter what he's done. Now, it may be that the next case will chop him off at the knees, and that'll be him finished. Again, I think it maybe doesn't, as I said already, it maybe doesn't matter too much who the Republicans put forward now, because I think regardless they're beaten. Biden is not, he's not a superhero in any way. He's not perfect, but he's just kind of normal, and he's had some success, and so I think he walks the next election if he
Thanks,
doesn't fall
John.
down on the way.
Well, yes. And I was thinking a little bit, and I was reading that when I was preparing this story, I was thinking a little bit. I was thinking about Trump's notorious long term legal advisor, the late Roy Cohn. Cohen's clients included Trump, Rupert Murdoch, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of New York, and Carmine Galante and Fat Tony Salerno, suspected mafia chieftains. Now, in the Washington Post in 2016 described an early meeting between Trump and Cohen in 71 at a hot spot called the Le Club in New York. Trump introduced himself to Cohen and was sitting at a nearby table and sought Cohen's advice. How should Trump and his father respond to a Justice Department allegation that their house building company had systemically discriminated against black people who wanted to buy houses? The Post reported that Cohen said, "My view is to tell them to go to hell and then fight the thing in court." Cohen eventually filed this is 1971, a $100 million countersuit against the Justice Department for its allegations against the Trump's company. After that suit failed, Trump and his father settled the Justice Department claims out of court. Now, in this morning's news, the judge has said that whilst a highly publicised criminal investigation is unwelcome and unpleasant, no court has ever held that that status alone provides a basis for the court to interfere with or halt an investigation. So, in a sense, it's no surprise the judge dismissed Trump's motion. And do you think, in light of his history with Roy Cohen and his other litigation, is Trump simply playing for time with one eye on the election, and is he playing for time just like every other mob boss who's been hunted down by the Department of Justice and the FBI?
Yeah, I mean the links with the mob are quite indicative, aren't they? I mean, I wouldn't put it past Trump to try and have Biden assassinated. I mean, the Americans have a bit of a history of assassinating their presidents, so that's not entirely out of the question that they may try that, and Biden might be quite easy to assassinate. You just maybe put something in front of his feet. Um, so, but again, I don't think it matters. As I keep saying, there, it's as it is with the Conservatives here. It doesn't really matter what they do. It doesn't matter what they get away with. They're done. And I think the Republicans are at least for the moment done. And I think we could be looking at a very long time of democratic rule, just as we're about to see the same. I think in the UK, while we might be, as I am, deeply dissatisfied with Keir Starmer, I don't think the Tories are coming back for a very long time.
Well, that's a fair point, John. In terms of the time it took the Tories to recover from the end of the Thatcher John Major era,
Yeah.
if recent history teaches us anything, it might very well be the case that that's repeated here. Do you think?
Yes, I mean, well, you have to say in retrospect, what Thatcher and John Major did wasn't maybe quite as bad as what the current Tories are trying to do. Um, Seems fairly tame now.
Well, that's a good point. And the way in which Rishi Sunak was seeking to associate himself with Mrs. Thatcher by sitting in her former official car at the weekend and tweeting photographs.
Yeah,
Do you think that's what's going on? Are they trying to trying to improve their reputation by association with Mrs. Thatcher?
yeah. I mean, that's going to work well in Scotland, isn't it?
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. We'll move on to our final story now because a steep increase in paddleboarders needing to be rescued around the UK has prompted a plea from the RNLI for people to consider the weather and tides before setting off. Pandemic physical distancing measures fueled a surge in interest in water sports, and paddleboard retailers sold out, and thousands of people joined organisations such as British Canoeing as the coronavirus lockdowns eased. But the swift rise in popularity will have meant more novices at sea and a rise in the number of people getting into difficulty. The RNLI and British Canoeing have encouraged those using kayaks, canoes, or paddleboards to prioritise their safety as they prepare for an increase in visitors to the coastline. A spokesperson for the lifeboat charity said there had been a 21% increase in call-outs to people on paddleboards. Since 2017, the RNLI has saved 77 paddleboarders from life-threatening situations, and 32 of those were in the last year. Many more lives of kayakers and canoers were saved last year than in 2021. The RNLI's recommendations to stay safer are to check websites such as Surf Forecast or speak to lifeguards for a specialist local forecast. One common and deceiving danger is how calm the waters may appear to be at one moment in time. You should bring a waterproof pouch for your phone, and you can also take a personal locator beacon. You should wear a buoyancy aid such as a life jacket or a personal flotation device. You should attach an inflatable leash to the board so that in the event of falling off, the board cannot drift far. You should tell other people about your plans, even if you're in a group. Make sure other people who are on shore know where you are, and please paddle within your abilities. So, John, I'm not sure. Are you an enthusiastic paddleboarder?
No, 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 no. It's the hills for me, or it was the
Well,
hills for me.
you and me both. But it struck me that records have been falling as more people have taken up paddleboarding, albeit not you or me. A Norfolk woman, Samantha Rutt, broke the Northern Ireland to Scotland paddleboard record last year, making the crossing in little more than 5 hours, just a couple of minutes over 5 hours. And it struck me that is that not a bit much when what you actually want to do is go for a pint in Donegal or Port Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't get it. And well, one of the things that really worries me about paddleboarding, I've never done it, is that I gather it from underneath your silhouette to a great white shark is just like a seal. So, and I hear sharks are moving north all the time. They've arrived back in Cape Cod near Boston. Won't be long before there are great whites up here if global warming continues. So there's another reason. The serious point is, I think, isn't it astonishing that we have a charity dealing with this? An advanced, affluent Northern European country relies on a charity, the RNLI, to rescue people at sea. Isn't it astonishing? Again, prioritising, spending money on on dividends to shareholders rather than investing in public services. Surely, do the Germans rely on a charity to rescue people, or is it a state service? I feel sure it must be the latter.
I think you're probably right. And just as you were talking there, I was starting to think if I can think of the arrangements in other European countries, but I can't off the top of my head.
No,
I think certainly
the
in the
Coast
south of
Guard could
France,
do it.
it's organised locally. I think by the
Is
state,
it?
by the local department.
Yeah, right.
Uh, is my recollection. I could be wrong,
Well,
but that's my
as the
recollection.
German, yeah, as one German comedian said that that in Germany they don't give to charity; they pay their taxes.
Yes, yes. Henning Vane is seldom wrong, and
Yeah,
I'm not sure if he's appearing at the Edinburgh Festival, at the Fringe Festival this year. I hope he is, because he'll be getting sellout crowds, I'm sure. But thank you, John. That's whilst you and I may not indulge in paddleboarding, we'll be hoping that people are taking good care of themselves on the coastlines around Scotland, no matter the way in which they are in or on our waters, and that they take good care. I think there is a marine society in Germany which provides the German Sea Rescue Society, I'm being told. But we will investigate more about the comparative means of saving lives at sea around Europe, and we'll come back and talk about it another time. I'm absolutely sure, because we're all great supporters of the RNLI, and in particular the volunteers who put their own lives at risk when they are saving lives at sea. But I'm afraid that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland depends on the generosity of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs, and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station, and to make new programmes for you. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Right now, we have a really pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay the bills and to ensure that we are able to continue making programmes. We've raised about £9,000 so far, but we really need to raise the remaining £21,000 as soon as possible. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Now, we will be back tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock sharp for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please come back and join us then. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's been watching this evening, and of course, I'd like to give a very special thanks to our very special guest, John Robertson. Thanks, John.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this evening on Broadcasting Scotland, John. Please look after yourselves and please have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy, but we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.